This week on the f***ing Eldritch Lorecast.
You're clenching for those couple moments.
So, Teos, we're going to fight you.
The Wizards of the Coast have posted a sage advice.
Every tabletop game is a role-playing game if you try hard enough.
The legendary acquisition, the Defy Media acquisition, etc., etc.
Uncommon Jeremy Crawford L. That doesn't make any sense.
So you can build a character in Demiplane and use it directly in Roll20.
D&D have been putting in a lot of work to being quite family-friendly.
All of that and f***ing more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in every realm there is. My name is Ben Byrne, and if you've never listened to this before, you won't know, but I am every week joined by Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and reporting from the sane side of the globe this week, Dael Kingsmill. I almost said welcome to the Lorecast like you were a guest. That would have been funny.
I am. I'm a very special guest. I just am here all the time.
Well, speaking of very special guests, Sam, who emailed the Lorecast, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, his group have noticed the kind of naming convention for named spells in D&D, right? You've got possessive proper noun, adjective noun, Melf's acid arrow, Tasha's hideous laughter. Sam wants to know, what does Mike's hard lemonade do?
It's an excellent question, and it leads to more questions in my mind, such as, what does Kirk's creaming soda do? But surely Mike's hard lemonade, it's gotta turn liquids into solids, right?
Okay.
I don't know. Someone else is going to have a much better answer. And my money's on Shawn Merwin or James Hake.
Good odds. Mike's hard lemonade. Well, we all know the saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And so if making life easy is making lemonade out of a hard situation, then surely Mike's hard lemonade turns things back into lemons. So following that line of logic, it is a production undoing chronomancy spell that reverts things from their process form into their natural one. A table back into a tree, for example.
Okay. That's a fantastic, genuine answer. Shawn Merwin, what about you?
As a magic action, you create a foul-tasting liquid that you can drink as part of the casting, or you can give it to a creature within 5 feet of you. When the liquid is consumed, the creature drinking it gains 2d4 plus 2 temporary hit points. It also has disadvantage on wisdom ability checks and saving throws for 10 minutes. It also comes in black cherry, strawberry, and cranberry.
Oh my God. Also, you two and these formats of deep thought, you take a guess which people on the podcast are seasoned game designers.
Yeah, I like, Shawn, you appeared to be reading. Did you take the time to write down an actual designed answer?
I am literally in the middle of working on about 100 magic items. And this question popped up and it just went right into the process.
It just accidentally ended up on the conveyor belt.
Luckily, and it may actually make it into the Grim Hollow Transform book. We'll see.
Guess we're doing lemonade now.
Yeah. I did work on the saddest thing for me about moving from 2014 to 2024 is the fact that Jim's Magic Missile and Jim's Glowing Coin are going to be not in that 2024 rules. It's so sad when I hear people complaining about how awful those spells are, and I realize that I am the one that foisted them on the world. It brings a little bit of glee to this rancid heart of mine.
Speaking of glee and rancid hearts, this rancid heart was pleased when they gleefully noted that Wizards of the Coast have posted a sage advice onto D&D Beyond. This is a new article, section, part of D&D Beyond. This is replacing somewhat Jeremy Crawford just firing off at the hip at Twitter, answering questions about specific rules interactions in the new D&D 2024 rules. And it is not super easy to find on the website. It's under sources. So you have to, it's basically where all the other books are. It's kind of treated like a book source on D&D Beyond. And it's basically a fact filled with questions about the rules, which start with the first question being, why even have sage advice when a DM can just make everything up and make a ruling on the rules? And their answer was to provide a strong foundation of rules so that you're not playing an improv game, you're playing a tabletop dice game. I'm paraphrasing.
This feels like quite a reversal of the attitude of 2014 5th edition, right? Where, what was it? Rulings, not rules was the prevailing attitude. Now, I know sage advice did happen in that era, but the way you just paraphrased, Ben, it really feels like a different tack is being taken.
I don't want to misrepresent what they said because there was a little bit of nuance in that. They had a couple of questions to kind of like qualify the purpose of sage advice, which the first answer was something to the effect of providing a stable basis of rules that everybody can kind of understand this is the way these interactions are meant to go. Then they had about 2 or 3 other questions kind of along those lines in that segment at the top of the sage advice fac that said things like ultimately, like, it's up to the DM. If they want to change their mind, they can. They're not like suggesting that the rules, these are the rules and this is the way the game has to be played, so much as just saying, you know, not every DM enjoys improvising every other rule, so here are some bases of understanding that we can all agree upon as rules as intended and written in some capacity.
Well, I don't disagree with that.
It was a very game designer thing that they put out, which is, we're doing the best we can. We can't do everything. We expect DMs to do some of the lifting for us, but here are our thoughts on some of these questions. And I wish they would actually take it one step further and go into a little more of the thought process behind it, because I think that would actually be really helpful for everyone, for people who want to understand why rules are written the way they are, and also to sort of alleviate some of the disputes at the table where people think that the designers are thinking things that the designers aren't thinking. If the designers say, this is what we're thinking, then that can alleviate some of that back and forth right there.
It's such an interesting, talking point to me, because, we talk about rules as written, we talk about rules as intended. And then there's also this overarching thing of, well, ultimately the GM has ultimate fiat and they're going to, make a calling at the time, and that's what stands. And it really highlights the way in which, and this is why, at least as technology currently stands, AI is terrible at running D&D. It's because ultimately it is a game of judgment. It is a game of adjudicating and making calls based on a lot of nuance and a lot of context. And so it's something that has always kind of had a bizarre push and pull and resistance in terms of having a given rule set with exact answers, because that's the freedom that comes with a TTRPG, and so a human is kind of necessary to run the game because you need that judgment factor. And so having rules as written be king never quite works, having just wing it never quite works, and rules as intended sort of floats in between. And then, of course, Jeremy Crawford, as you said, firing from the hip on Twitter, is doing a very peculiar in-between, somewhere between rules as written and rules as intended, where he's like, well, this is the wording that ended up in the book, so this is the exactitudes of what invisibility means, and sometimes it just lands in a place that feels wrong, and people know that it feels wrong, and it's always a really weird thing. And it also makes me think of, even other games outside of this genre, like the game Monikers or the game Mafia, which are games that ultimately you don't actually need that product to play. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It is really easy if you know how to play. They're folk games in a lot of ways, where it's like, as long as you know how to play it, you can do it. But then you have to kind of, these companies, these products have to try to rely on the brandiness of what they are and all the trappings and aesthetics of what they are in order to sort of pull people in. So to me, it does also make sense that D&D would try to pull us a little bit further away from that folk identity of, whatever the GM calls in the moment is what goes, which they always have been on that sort of rules-heavy, crunchier side of things. Very different to, a bunch of one-page RPGs or whatever, or Lasers and Feelings, where you can really just wing it in a lot of ways. But it makes sense to sort of strengthen that brand identity of, yes, our game is our rules and our rules matter. I don't know. None of this is like a call of like what is good or what is bad. I just find it an interesting subject.
Well, what's interesting, Dael, is everything you just said, they added a category, rules as intended, rules as written, and rules as fun.
Yeah.
And that sort of goes to the point you were making, where they're saying between all of this is your table, make it work for your table. To narrow it down there.
Well, I think also, as you were saying, Dael, they're trying to find their genre, right? Well, not trying to find it. They know what their genre is, but trying to define it for other people, which is 5e.
Trying to wrangle it.
Well, yeah, part of the reason 5e is so popular and has been so popular and led to this explosion is its accessibility, right? It's easy to understand the base rules of 5e, and you can kind of play 5e with relatively few of all the rules, if that makes sense. You know, a recent example, you don't need bastions to be able to play 5e, but there's probably even simpler examples, like you don't need encumbrance, you don't need rations to be able to fundamentally play the game. These rules that people tend to forget. But it is not, you know, my understanding, and I've never played one of these before, so people forgive me, but like Powered by the Apocalypse, I understand, is a little bit more loosey-goosey. It has mechanics, but it's kind of like you describe what you want to happen, and then let's roll dice to see if that outcome makes sense, is kind of my understanding. It's a little bit more improvisational, whereas 5e is you swing this sword. This is the sword that you are using to attack this monster. And it's kind of the difference between something that feels more like a game, like a war game that has these set bounds that some people prefer either because they're playing because of the fun of the game, or it feels like the world is more visceral to them, as opposed to more impro-heavy games where people are playing more specifically because of the story or because they don't want to feel constrained by the rules and they just want their characters to swing from the chandelier because it's fun. Does that make sense?
I like that you bring up Powered by the Apocalypse because it has this reputation of being very loosey-goosey story gamey, and I think you'll find that most PBTA games actually aren't that.
Okay.
And in fact, when it comes to the indie game scene, a bit of discourse that I often find and that I am still trying to unravel my feelings about internally, right? It's an open question in my own soul about this, is should games actually be played with very strict deference to its rules, right? People talk about, especially people who make indie games, right? Because D&D is their biggest competitor in a way. Not even really competitor in terms of money, but competitor in terms of their players' time, right? Why play some other game when you can play anything in D&D? There's quite a bit of ire from indie game communities often that at the notion that D&D can be played from the hip in that way. Sometimes it's sour grapes, but I think there's also legitimately good design discourse to be found there because, hey, why else do we make game systems, right? Why don't we play anything other than D&D? Well, it's because other systems can do other things better than what D&D's system does. In fact, trying to improvise D&D into doing just about anything often makes for a worse D&D experience unless you are a really, really good set of players and game masters. For example, Brennan Lee Mulligan is on record talking about how when they play D&D Live in Dimension 20, they're quite happy to ignore D&D's rules for social engagement, right? The idea of attitudes and influence actions and things like that, because as seasoned improv comics, those rules would just get in their way. Right? They're not going to act out a sword fight against a dragon, but they're perfectly capable of telling a scene, telling a story in the moment. And so there's pros and cons on either side of this, right? Of playing D&D however you like versus playing another system to the hilt that does exactly what you want it to. It's one of those eternal questions that I will hope RPGs as a medium will really ever find a definitive answer to.
When we bring Powered by the Apocalypse into it, it becomes a discussion between a game and a story. Powered by the Apocalypse itself, and many of the games derived from it, take a narrative-first approach. But that doesn't mean that the rules don't matter. What you do is you tell a story until something that the rules do handle comes up, and then you switch over to the rules. The issue with that is there can be this idea of in a game you take turns. But we're not taking turns in Powered by the Apocalypse. We're telling a story. And in that story, the same player may act 3 times before anyone else does, if that's what the story dictates. And as you sit there and the game master continues to tell the story and suddenly no one is saying anything, the game master could then say, well, my giant crocodilian will now bite you because no one is doing anything. And there's a giant crocodilian standing there and its impetus is to bite people. So therefore it bites you and it's not making an attack roll. It just bites you. Now, what are you going to do about that? Oh, no one says anything? Well, guess what? It bites you again. There's this disconnect sometimes between a story game and a storytelling game that can be hard to grok for people, whereas D&D is a game that we take turns in, and even if you don't know what you want to do, you have to do it because it is your turn.
So here we are again, touching on things that I find fascinating. So there is a common refrain these days when we talk about TTRPGs that it's like it is a collaborative storytelling experience. But ultimately, is it that, or is because it's a game? And I think the emphasis is more on game than it is on story. And there is certainly a drive for story. But when we look at the sort of wibbly wobbliness of the genre and where its boundaries lie, I'm kind of obsessed at the moment with what has been called American freestyle RPGs. So a lot of the sort of Morningstar games that come out of Bully Pulpit, Alice is Missing, I would probably categorize as an American freestyle game, where it is role play that leans slightly in a very, very soft, friendly, non-intimidating way on the LARP side of things, right? It's just a sort of set of prompts and guidelines to you role-playing as characters with your friends. That is very, very heavily story. Whereas once we get along to this side of D&D, that jungle gym that I always talk about in the rules system is there's a jungle gym for you to play on to make it safe to role-play. But a lot of what it's letting you role-play is we've given you specific things that say that once in every round of combat, you get to do an action and a movement and a whatever. And here are your list of actions that you can do. And it's much more heavily structured towards game over story. And I think that plays a role in what's going on as well. I feel like I keep dragging us further and further away from the actual original talking point. I like it.
Well, for me, I think you're kind of like between the either or, you're missing the and also. Because for me, if I like analogize these to video games, I think 5e sits in kind of that for me, and I'm talking to my preferences here, that sweet spot of something like Oblivion, Skyrim, The Witcher, Mass Effect, these expansive RPGs that are about their story, but they have mechanics that feel real and present and make the world feel dangerous and make the monsters feel real and like there is a real threat there. And so there is skill to playing these games and understanding those systems that make you feel not just like I'm Geralt of Rivia, this famous Witcher who's good at things because the story tells me I am, but because I am good at the mechanics of the game, I feel more like that character. Right? As opposed to something like Detroit Become Human, those really light mechanic games, the Telltale games that are really all about story. The Batman one doesn't really have any fighting in it. It's all just quick time events to get you through the story.
It is fun though.
And that's that American freestyle that you were talking about. I'm not saying it's not, but that's that American freestyle that you were talking about. And then I think the more over here, when I think of like Call of Duty, or even if you think of the single player of Call of Duty, it is you are a military person, you are going to go here, you are going to shoot these people, there is no opportunity to negotiate, there's a story there, but it is in the background of you running around and shooting a bunch of people.
You're right, and there's all these different sliding scales that can be adjusted, for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that in my mind is the wargaming. Like, that's where you get to the point where it is like full mechanics. I still like a lot of story in my war games. I do a lot of conversion and a lot of like painting this guy's special because of X reason. And that's still part of that hobby. But when you play that game, it is much more like a sport in quotation marks, where you're just rolling dice to see who manages to shoot who. And you're not really too worried about any individual person surviving to serve the story, because that's not why you're there. You're there to compete with each other.
Right. Well, it's interesting as well, because if we do start bringing in video games into the mix as examples, where does something like XCOM land, where it is quite war-gamey, highly tactical, but it's also really heavy on the emergent narrative, like Michael in chat was bringing up, sure. Where it's, the mechanics can still lead to this story emerging out of it. It's just that maybe you have less agency in the direction of the story, but it's like you're saying, it's just all sliding scales. Yeah.
I wanted to jump in and play devil's advocate for a little bit here, because this is an old chestnut at this point, but people in these sort of conversations have said before, every tabletop game is a role-playing game if you try hard enough. You can make a role-playing game out of Monopoly, a madcap game of you being a dog, a hat, a shoe, and a clothes iron, becoming real estate barons. And if you wanted to, irrespective of the mechanics, you could tell that story by speaking in character all the time and
Mika
playing the
Harper
mechanics.
Used to have a series on the Geek and Sundry Vlogs channel where she would do this. She would play a game that was so not role play and make it be role play.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a very old chestnut, but when do we cross the threshold of that being something ridiculous to that being something that's intended by the play experience, right? Because you could do this with anything. Why is D&D doing that a credit to its design, whereas it's not even a consideration for something like Monopoly, or rather it's a joke when you apply it to Monopoly?
Well, that's why, I mean, for the record, I played Rocket League as a role-playing game where in my head, I was like the commentators commentating on this up-and-coming star who's like going to take the Rocket League world by storm. And here they come, you know, like I spent a couple of moments the other night staring into the fire in Oblivion because the animation reminded me of the Oblivion gate I'd gone through. And I was like, my character's suffering post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And I just spent time just staring into the fire, like role-playing in my own head. So I'll turn everything into a role-playing game. But I think to actually talk to your question, James, intelligently, or to actually answer it, this is why I think, personally, 5e fits in that middle area with games like Oblivion, Skyrim, The Witcher, you know, name a role-playing game. And it's not a hard set 3 discrete categories. You know, XCOM probably a little bit more towards the systems. Something like Dark Souls is probably a lot more towards the systems, even though it has a veneer of like a fantasy role-playing game. But I think that that's what 5e does really well, is it sits in between those where it's light enough and it is story-driven enough to be about the story. And there's enough flexibility in there that you can do things that are about the story, but it has a hard-coded or a system that is hard-coded enough that you feel like the world has a sense of reality to it, that it's going to bite back in a real way, you know, and not just kind of mold to your suggestions of what should happen.
It's funny you bring this up, Ben, because a couple years ago at Big Bad Con, maybe I've told this story before, but I was in a midnight game of Blood on the Clock Tower that was being hosted by Spencer Stark, who made Alice is Missing, and his co-author of Daggerheart, Rowan Hall. And they turned this game of Blood on the Clock Tower, which is a hidden role deduction game par excellence. I'd played it in a more subdued setting earlier that day. I was like, oh my God, yes, let's do this. It was a full game, and it was basically a parlor LARP at that point, right? A parlor LARP being a LARP where everyone is in plain clothes, and usually just in a hotel room, but they are nonetheless doing the LARP as if they were fully in costume doing full WYSIWYG stuff. Unfortunately, this game didn't really have enough time to get going. It was interrupted by an errant fire alarm that kind of ruined everything. But, you know, we were getting all these hidden roles, and while you might play a hidden role game like, you know, Avalon or The Resistance or something like that in a very mechanical way, everyone was like, no, I am going to play this to the hilt, and we're going to walk around. We're going to have little side conversations and interviews, and we're going to make a backstory for this character. And Cosmic Postman in chat said, the threshold of this question is defined by how many theater kids are in the room. And that game absolutely proves Cosmic Postman correct 100%, because we'll just do anything.
Oh, yeah. Also, I love this particular game of Blood on the Clock Tower at Big Bad Con is legendary, because I've never been to Big Bad Con, but I've heard the story of this game from like 6 different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great game for about an hour.
Until the fire alarm.
Yeah, I mean, we got all of our character backstories set. We were walking around. It took about an hour, right? It was like 1 a.m. by the time we got going. And then literally in the first 10 minutes of the first round of the game, of which there's like as many rounds as there are people, and there were like 20 people in the room, the fire alarm went off and everyone was like, we can't do this anymore. Yeah, legendary game.
You know what you needed is more rules to keep things focused.
Coming back to the Sage Advice article on D&D Beyond, I think that exists partly so that D&D can play that role, as you were just saying, James, for groups who don't have a lot of theater kids, you know, in the party, and they want to play the game. You know, it is about rolling dice and feeling like they're killing monsters, but they don't want to spend, 30 seconds staring into the fire pretending that they're suffering from post-traumatic stress from literally visiting hell. Yeah, Sage Advice. It's up there now if you want to go check it out. We've spent a long time talking about this, but I thought I'd just ask, was there any rulings in there anybody spotted that jumped out to them as curious? Because I know that when Jeremy Crawford was firing off at the hip every now and again, that would get some reactions like, really? Is that how that rule's meant to work?
So Teos and I got into something today I wanted to bring up to you folks. I apologize, but this is too good. There were 2 that for me, there were two rulings or two pieces of advice that went together. And to Teos, they were contradictory. So I want to read them to you. The first one is about a readied action. So you ready an action, you use your action, and if a trigger goes off, that action becomes your reaction and you do it. And the question was, if you ready an action, can you take a different reaction if that different reaction is triggered? I.e., I ready an action to attack the goblin when it runs up to me, but another goblin runs past me over here. Can I stop what I was readied and use my reaction to take an opportunity attack?
I'd say so.
Yeah,
Like
and the answer
feint.
was yes. Yes, you can. You can give up that readied action to take this other reaction. Okay, we're good with that. Then they had a question about if you ready a spell. If you ready a spell, you use the spell slot and you spend any components, even if the readied spell does not go off. And so Teos said that was contradictory. He said that you haven't actually cast the spell yet, so it should not use up the spell slot or use up the resources. Like if, say it costs 100 gold pieces and diamonds to cast this spell. You use those 100 gold pieces worth of diamonds, even if the spell is not cast when you ready it. And my thought was, you're using your action, you're quote unquote wasting your action in the first example. So therefore it's the exact same thing of wasting your spell and the components. And Teos didn't agree with me. So I just want
so on
everyone
your
to tell me
side.
they're
I'm
right.
sorry, Teos.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm so on your side because spells have casting times. So if it had a casting time of a reaction, then sure, but then you wouldn't be readying your action to do the thing anyway. So it's more like you're doing the spell and then holding its charge, like waiting. I'm on your side.
Okay, thank you.
Me as well. I think, and I can see how, like, from a mechanics standpoint, a player might argue, like, this is bullshit. Why do I lose my spell slot? I didn't use the spell in it. But from a story perspective, kind of exactly what Dael said. Like, for me, it's always been like, magic is unpredictable and difficult to wield. And this just kind of adds to that feeling that if you want to hold on to a fireball, you're clenching for those couple moments.
Those were the two rulings that I had the most reaction to, no pun intended.
On what side do you stand, James?
Teos is or Shawn's side? Oh, Shawn is in the right for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
see?
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
So, Teos, we're going to fight you.
That's probably just why this is the number one tabletop podcast in all
Come on to
realm.
Lorecast. It's a safe space for you. Just come back.
An interesting one that I spotted, which I don't have an opinion to agree or disagree with it, I just thought it was very interesting, was a question around, can you use Dispel Magic on creations of a spell like Animate Dead? And the answer was to basically look at the duration of the spell. If the duration is instantaneous, the magic has come and gone. And therefore, the result of the spell is not itself still being affected by the magic. So Animate Dead, I think, was the example. You've raised the zombie, but now the zombie is its own thing. So it's not being connected to you in any way, because that's not how the spell describes it. But speaking of what we were talking about last week, I think the conjure woodland beings or conjure spells that kind of have an aura around you that have a duration of a minute or 10 minutes, however long it is, that is a consistent, sustained magical effect that can be dispelled. And I thought that was interesting in reflection to like a ruling from 2014 that I've always maintained that I don't think matters anymore in 2024, but that like the spikes from spike growth, the piercing damage, is not magical because the spell doesn't say that it's magical damage. It just says piercing damage. But I've had players insist that it should be magical piercing damage because it comes from a spell.
Well, I guess there is that weird little thing of like
ruling.
Piercing damage from non-magical weapons, that thing that exists in the wording. And I guess there is wiggle room there for it's like, right, but it was summoned by magic. So is it a magical plant weapon? And
that's the argument. 5e 2024 no longer makes distinctions between magical and non-magical damage, so fortunately it's a moot point, and to be honest kind of proves me right, but discussion for another time.
I win.
One of the controversial ones from 2014, that speaking of shooting at the hip, the question in 2014 was, if you are holding but not wielding a +2 shield, can you get the +2 to your armor class from the magic, even if not from the +2 from the shield? And I think it was Jeremy who ruled that, yes, you get the +2. If you're a wizard just holding the shield in your hand, you get the +2. And so in this iteration of the rules, someone put in, no, you must be proficient with and don the shield in order to get the +2 magical bonus from the shield. And so that was almost like we need to roll this one back as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Uncommon Jeremy Crawford L. That doesn't make any sense.
I think there were a couple of rules. I don't remember what it was.
Uncommon.
Yeah. At least when it comes to Sage
Specifically when
Advice.
talking about Sage Advice. It's lucky I didn't start fights with him on Twitter.
What, you don't want to roll 1d4 for your magic missile?
Which, as Michael in chat highlighted, but is worth mentioning, this Sage Advice article has not been written by any individual person. It looks like it's been contributed to by the team, probably having a sit down on a Thursday afternoon, all right, let's go through our commonly asked questions, bang a couple of these out, make sure we're all happy with the answers.
My ideal version of Sage Advice now would just be like a spreadsheet where people could add in their own little things. This is what this should mean. And then people could add little asterisks and commentary on it. I think that would be fun.
Okay, my ideal Sage Advice, though, is get every designer on the D&D team in a room and ask them a question and get different answers from all of them. And then be like, ruling's not rules.
Did anybody else just hear James say shit by accident? All right, moving on. Roll20 and Demiplane have combined. I mean, they combined like 12 months ago when Roll20 acquired Demiplane, purchased it, if you will. 12 months later, a public beta has now launched for Demiplane character sheets to integrate directly with Roll20. Disclaimer up front on this one for the comment section. Feel free to throw your comments below because it helps us on YouTube. I'm not a regular Demiplane or Roll20 user, so I had to kind of try to pass how this worked and how this has been working over the last 12 months a little bit. So bear with me. What this beta does is allow you to link characters. So you can build a character in Demiplane and use it directly in Roll20 with no need to export or rebuild your character. Some of this has been accessible since Feb. This is where I've had to pass it out a little bit. But you can share subscriptions between platforms. There's platform syncing, allowing you to use content purchased on either platform in either platform, which I think is really great. It really just feels like these two companies are trying to integrate entirely into each other, and this is just the process of stitching them together. Apparently, that's been accessible in some capacity since February, but now can be used in the VTT. Roll20 subscribers can use Demiplane perks, such as content sharing and unlimited characters. So if you subscribe to Roll20, you can use that perk in Demiplane. And Demiplane character sheets available on Roll20. The games that are currently included are Alien RPG, Candela Obscura, Cyberpunk Red, Marvel Multiverse RPG, Pathfinder 2E, and Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition.
I'm always skeptical of vertical digital integration as a rule, but every now and then it does give us some nice things like cross-platform compatibility. What was it? What was the tool that cross-compatible D&D Beyond in Roll20? There was one of those.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember that name, James.
Yeah, it was really good. It wasn't official, but it was a great little fan mod.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm glad it exists. You know, if these companies have to be owned together and thus give us a frightening new risk of digital monopoly over tabletop role-playing games, at least we better get some cool stuff out of it.
It feels like a pillar of the functions of capitalism. And it's like, look, if something's efficient and convenient, we're going to like it.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that, like, when you talk about monopolies, I think somebody who is a Seattle detractor would argue that this is the opposite of that this really competes with D&D Beyond in terms of monopolizing the digital space for tabletop RPGs, right?
Yeah.
Demiplane, as far as I'm aware, they might have been working on one, but they didn't have a virtual tabletop. They were more like D&D Beyond in its initial conception as a character sheet and an index of rules. The kind of merging Roll20 and Demiplane in this way, and again, I don't use these programs a lot, so I'm not I'm not aware of what they're fully capable of, but this to me sounds like D&D Beyond and maps, you know what I mean? Like just kind of connected together. And I think it's great. It's a great option for people, especially for people who love D&D Beyond and become really integrated on D&D Beyond, but they want to try Pathfinder or Cyberpunk or Alien or whatever, but they really love their digital tools because it makes the game so much more accessible. I think this is a great option. And to see it get more functionality, I think is a good thing. Being aware that like Roll20 also, they purchase or enter partnership with One Bookshelf who run Drive-Through RPG and DM's Guild. And this kind of goes to a point that Matt Colville actually brought up on this podcast like a year ago, but we made a short out of it. So I was reminded of it recently where Matt was talking about how fans of digital platforms don't necessarily see themselves as customers of Wizards of the Coast or customers of Paizo or whatever company. They don't see themselves as customers of the designers. They see themselves as customers of the platform. And I think having such a wide offering of different games on Demiplane really helps to reinforce that feeling among customers who might want to try other RPGs. If they're already users of Demiplane, will be like, oh, well, what else is on Demiplane? That I love using this platform. Therefore, I am a customer of this platform. What else will I, this is not necessarily a conscious thought going through their head, but they might just start browsing Demiplane. So convenient for the user, probably convenient for the makers as well.
I just want to be on record saying that I know somewhere out there in the ether, there is a joke to be made throwing back to, because we've been talking about the Monopoly, there's a throwback joke in here somewhere about the Monopoly TTRPG or Freestyle LARP that James is talking about, but I can't make it work. So just imagine I did it.
Yeah, use your role-playing imagination to envision the great joke we just made.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing about this news I just quickly want to point out is that among the games that Demiplane is putting into beta for their character sheets to be available on Roll20, D&D 5th edition is not among them, 2014 or 2024. Now, we did just have the SRD for 2024 drop, so that could be part of the reason that they didn't know legally what they were going to be able to use from the 2024 rules, and they didn't want to put effort and time into the 2014 version of the rules. But this does potentially, this is a bit of speculation, but as Taos knows, we love speculating on this podcast, to sort of show their hand a little bit in how Demiplane and Roll20 want to position themselves in the digital tabletop market as the alternative to D&D. And knowing that they're not necessarily going to be able to peel customers away from D&D Beyond, especially now that maps are there. To be that virtual tabletop solution, but they can be that place where you can digitally go and try other games that D&D Beyond does not provide a solution to necessarily. For their, future ambitions, I think they've already talked about wanting deeper kind of cross-platform syncing and are currently working to make the full Cyberpunk Red library available in cross-platform sync between Roll20 and Demiplane. So my understanding at the moment is it's just what's accessible on the character sheet, not necessarily every product that you purchase between them. But there you go. That's that news. And speaking of that news, we're about to get a little bit less of it. Because unfortunately,
that's a sad transition.
Yeah, this is a sad transition. Polygon, gaming news website, has recently been sold to or purchased by, however you want to look at it, the Valnet Group, which is their proper name, but also a very corporate way to refer to them. The Valnet Group, a digital media investment company who purchased the site from Vox Media. Valnet CEO Hassan Youssef has said, quote, "It is with immense pride and gratitude that we welcome Polygon into our growing family of world-class gaming brands. This moment marks a powerful reaffirmation of our deep commitment to gaming." And then they laid off all the gaming staff. Well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the reporting staff at Polygon in the gaming sector got laid off, including Nicole Carpenter, who was a senior reporter, Michael McWhirton, who was a senior writer, and notably in the tabletop RPG space, Charlie Hall, who was a senior editor specifically reporting on tabletop RPGs. Each of them have posted on Blue Sky saying that they're available for work if there's anybody out there wanting to scoop up gaming journalists, but have unfortunately, they're no longer at Polygon. Polygon still exists currently as a website. It hasn't disintegrated, but as invariably happens with these acquisitions,
It's just wild that the cycle continues. I thought we would have been done with the cycle of, X company buys digital platform and then just it ends. Like it's still there, but it's a shell of its former self. I don't know. Lest we forget the legendary acquisition, the Defy Media acquisition, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Valnet is the host of such sterling reporting as you can get at Screen Rant, MovieWeb, Collider, Game Rant, The Gamer, OpenCritic, DualShockers. And if you don't associate those headlines with the best gaming media has to offer, I don't know what to tell you. It seems extremely apparent that Polygon will be added to a long list of likely AI-generated journalism slop produced by this company.
Hey. I learned from one of those websites, kind of while researching this story, that Matt Lillard is still putting out D&D themed whiskey. So there's news to be had there.
Hard-hitting journalism.
Yeah. We're up to Druid now. Tones of the Wilds or something it says.
It's a damn shame. Polygon put out a lot of some of my favorite video, like YouTube content as far as video gaming is concerned. And the link goes further. People like Griffin and Justin McElroy, formerly of Polygon. Brian David Gilbert, now a frequent host on Dropout, who of course also hosts Dimension 20. Not Brian David Gilbert, but Dropout, Polygon has been the point of origin for a lot of really valuable names in the TTRPG gaming space. And the thing I mourn the most about this is not necessarily the loss of the moment-to-moment gaming journalism, though I do mourn that. It's about the loss of the bottom step of the ladder, our gaming culture at large. And this is, I don't want to spark another AI conversation. Everyone who watches this show knows how I and all of us feel about it at this point. But one of the things I've said before is that that's the first thing that AI devours, is the bottom step, the lowest rung that gets people the sort of in the weeds, on the job training that they need to become really, to find their voice, to get mentorship, to become great new leading talent in this field, in all fields. So this one hurts.
G the Mystic in chat says Screen Rant is AI. And I think the significant thing to remember is that a lot of these are recognizable brands, any number of things, like a media output company who makes stuff on YouTube or a company that writes fun nerd articles or any number of these things, you might recognize them because a lot of the time they were built as a thing that people were making as something they loved, and it became a legitimate business, and they hired lots of people, and they were legit. But it's kind of like the equivalent of when someone makes a Reddit account and they fill it with real activity for a long time, so that then they can like build its sort of karma following, so that when they sell it to someone, it's got kind of this background, so they can use it for bots and stuff like that. And it's sorry, someone's building the ark next door, if you can hear that. But it's that kind of a thing where companies then swoop in and they purchase the reputation that has been built, and sort of bank on that. And you just have to watch the reanimated corpse of a thing you loved. Sorry, that was a strong reaction, but you get it.
I did some research, and people were saying about Valnet and some of their other brands, can I get a job writing for them? And people were saying, yes, if you want to, spend hours working on 1,000-page or 1,000-word article and get paid $20 for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if it's not AI built, you are working off the backs of these hardworking writers who, how much research are they going to do if they know at the end of this long process and all their work, they're going to get $20 for 30, 40 hours of work?
Content mills, we call them. Internet writing sweatshops. Not a good place to be.
That's the phrase I was thinking of. And they come in many different forms. I mentioned YouTube channel. There are YouTube channels that are these content mills as well. Yeah.
Yeah, disappointing. This following on from Dicebreaker, which was quite a good tabletop game journalism website, closed mid-2024. And there were also layoffs at comicbook.com last year, which included Christian Hoffer, who did some great work in the RPG space, tabletop space. Christian Hoffer currently, I don't know if he works for them directly or he's just freelancing, but he's over at EN World currently, doing articles there. And then in 2023, when IO9/Gizmodo laid off a bunch of their journalistic staff, including Lynn Kadega, who famously went on to co-found one of the success stories in this space, currently speaking, Rascal News. Go check it out. And also, this episode not sponsored by Matthew Lillard's Quests End, but just a couple of people were mentioning it in chat. I'll just make you Google slightly easier. It's called Quests End. They're up to Druid. There was a dragon one. Their theming's confusing. It's super expensive. Anyway, speaking of sad endings, worth noting, Alarums and Excursions, a nearly 50-year-old publication, is ending, or has ended, rather, as of last month, I believe. Alarums and Excursions was an amateur press association, kind of a zine that came out monthly for almost 50 years, with a very well-defined record in terms of like missed months. Very few of them in that time. It was edited through its entire run by Lee Gold since 1975, I believe, was when it started. And the publication has finally ended, unfortunately, due to Lee Gold experiencing vision deterioration, just due to age, which has unfortunately meant that they're no longer able to continue publishing the zine. Nearly 600 issues of the tabletop RPG content published across almost 50 years, kind of charting the history of the tabletop RPG industry as well. I'm going to be entirely honest, I was not aware of this literally before it was already over, as I think is going to be true for a lot of people, but I would be fascinated to kind of read individual issues through the years, like the rings on a tree, kind of seeing how the industry changed and evolved, every 5 years or so through that time. Was anybody here a fan of, or even a potentially contributor to this in its time?
Well, I was definitely not a contributor to it, but it's a remarkable coincidence. Right before this news broke, like within the week, I had just watched a, back catalog Matt Colville video that was talking about, I don't even remember what it was talking about at the time, the rise of self-publishing, or the rise of the of D&D as a rule set as not created by Gary Gygax, right? The community D&D rise. It's one of those videos. I wish I could say exactly which one it was, but Alarums and Excursions got a major feature in that. He even pulled up a couple of issues of it that he bought on eBay as he was cataloging this. He might have been talking about one of the old history books, might have been, maybe he was talking about the elusive ship. That was a more recent video. They're all mixed up in my brain. Doesn't matter. Go watch Matt Colville. You know we like him on this show. But he was talking about this, and based off of that, I went hunting down some old PDFs of this, and it's got this beautiful independent vibe to it, right? No pictures, hand set text in tiny point font, 3-column layout. It is, it's iconic. It doesn't look glossy. It doesn't look pretty. And I would say, and I say this with enormous love, a lot of the time the ideas aren't even good, but it was made by people, right? It's the idea of, I would take bad art made by people over glossy AI slop any day of the week. And this is the epitome of it. It's always interesting, always fascinating, always entertaining, even when it's not what you would call good with a capital G.
Well, speaking of swearing and James's potty mouth on this episode, we've got time for one quick listener email, which we will take from Peter. Peter asking, is there a place for profanity in official Wizards of the Coast products, or should it remain clean? Because there is a curse word on page 46 of the 2024 Monster Manual.
What is it?
I did go and find this.
Did you say page 34?
No. Let people go find it for themselves.
Ben
Don't give away
Ben has already said this word on the podcast so far. So
I want the full context.
So did James. I want the record to show.
This is true.
We can go back and check the recording.
What page did you say? 34?
46.
It is a quote from a character that is famously played during Acquisitions Incorporated games by Jeremy Crawford. And so it is within the context of that character, makes perfect sense within that character and within the milieu of that game. And that answers the question. Should it be in there? If it belongs in there, then it should be in there. And if it doesn't, then it shouldn't. And that
appears in a book with this illustration in it also.
Wow.
We can't put swearing in those same
Read
books.
the full quote, James.
shall I read the full quote? I've already said this
Sophie
word.
Coy.
All right.
I don't know. We might get demonetized or
Dante,
Pinkerton,
do
but
it.
give it a go.
Include it, Dante.
All right. This is, quoth Jeremy Crawford's gnome artificer, Vi. Honey, I've seen that would make you your and reach for the nearest drink. And then there's the of annihilation. If you see it, and if you can't get away from it, just fast.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I kind of love it because it's thank you, James.
Dante, please. Because it'll be funny. Because it'll really annoy everyone.
That's
Every
a
other
live
word.
stream exclusive. Like Shawn says, it's about if it fits in the context of the thing, right? And I feel like we kind of have a backwards understanding of like you make a product for a given audience, but actually you make a thing and the audience that is right for that product comes to it is usually how that works. So if you are a product where there's a little bit of comedy cursing from time to time, then that's going to be the audience that you ultimately cultivate. But what is interesting is that D&D have been putting in a lot of work to being quite family friendly. I think it is. I mean, look, as an Australian, I think it's fine and fun that they've decided that maybe a little bit of comedy cursing here and there is not the opposite. It's not juxtaposed dramatically to the idea of also being kind of family friendly.
D&D is PG in the way that an 80s action movie is PG.
Yeah. I think we're beyond, in a lot of ways, the fear that Wizards, or back in the day TSR once had, about the satanic panic and being what we would have called, blacklisted back then, what we would now call canceled today. I think we're beyond that worry, in that people who are going to get the vapors about a salty word here or there are probably not coming to the game anyway, probably not pushing their children toward the game. I think we're at a point where the players of this game are probably a little more mature than the people that would be upset by such language being used.
You're totally right. And it makes me think of, there was a conversation I had with someone at MCDM. Don't remember who. Maybe it was Jeff. Maybe it was James Introcaso. Who can say? But I was having a conversation with somebody about the idea that films have kind of moved away from general audiences as a concept, meaning not something for children, but something that is just like, it's not like a kid's movie that has stuff that will entertain adults. It is a movie that is broadly, I guess, ultimately for adults, but is fine for kids, or not even that. If I'm trying to think of examples like Back to the Future or something, right? Where it's like, it's not for kids, but kids can watch it. And I think that is a great place for D&D to sit as a game, to be like, yeah, I mean, sure, the kids are welcome, but we're not making it for them. We're not catering to them. We're not pandering to people who are going to, clutch their pearls and say, but won't somebody think of the children? I think that's a great little space for this game to sit.
And we're in a society now where parents will send their kids to watch Deadpool without even realizing that it is not necessarily catering toward children. But it's a superhero movie, so it's got to be fine for kids, right?
Hey, not even Deadpool. Even the Captain America movies threw in some curse words that would get bleeped on TV.
Language.
Scarlet Moth has broken the chat. Everybody's been swearing in the chat for the last couple minutes, but I just got an auto mod say like, are you going to let this one through? Are you going to let this one through? She appropriately kind of put an asterisk in, so I'm going to let it through so everybody can see what it was to know what broke the chat. But
Aussie.
Very Aussie. Oh, you
I
might have to scroll
let
up to be able to
D&D
find
use
it.
Drongo again.
What about a role-playing game? I just had this idea literally right now because Peter was asking about or actually, I think I added this to the question. Does this change for third parties or other companies? Is there swearing in other game products? Should there be? What about a game? And it's kind of like maybe a Shakespearean-inspired game where you have to like debate each other or insult each other, but you get points for different swear words. And then you get points for different contexts of those swear words. So like an F word, that's kind of, it's maybe more than a poo because it's a little spicier, but it's very common and like very diverse. You can get a lot of like single points, but if you find something really spicy, then you can get higher points. And then if you can use it creatively and everybody knows what you mean, then you get even more points for that. Is
I'm
that
down.
a game we would want to play, or am I just taking the concept
play
to
that
the
game.
hill?
Yeah, that sounds
I've
good.
assumed we've been playing this whole episode. I have the final score here. Dael wins.
Also, I didn't know this about Twitch chat, but now that I've let Scarlet Moth's potty mouth through once, now everybody can now use the spelling of that word. So you've broken open the gates, the floodgates. Swear responsibly, everyone. Speaking of things that aren't that bad, it is the end of this episode. But fear not, because we will be back next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday, streaming live on Twitch. Otherwise, the episode goes live on YouTube or Spotify on a Wednesday, I believe it is, in the US. And you can catch us live 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Monday. On a Tuesday. I always do this up. Ooh. Anyway, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Likes and thumbs and stars and stuffs. We'd love to get him. Goodbye. My name's Ben Byrne here with Shawn Moe and Dael Kingsmill, James Hake. This whole episode. Beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop, boop. We're all going to sound like R2-D2 by the end of it.
All right.
So whoever does the intro, you have to, like, this week on the, and then just beep, Eldritch Lorecast. All that and beep more right now. It has to happen.
Dante, you have to let me know when we're not live. Are we not live now? Okay.